I don't care. Put him under the jail. Put him in solitary. We do not shriek from putting other inmates in solitary confinement.
That's
Put him there and shut up. He can talk to the walls. He can talk to the rats. I don't care.
I'm going to play much more from where that came from. Really interesting CNN focus group where they discussed their feelings about Donald Trump. And this is undecided women specifically. And we'll talk about the absolute disaster that this represents for Donald Trump. Before doing that, I want to bring in Jessiah from Pondering Politics. Great to be with you, Jessiah.
Great to be with you, Luke.
And before doing anything else, I do want to play a portion from this conversation of a focus group, and this is part of a series being done by CNN focusing on women voters in particular who are right now identifying as undecided. And I'll talk about later how I don't exactly get, based on what they're saying, how they're still undecided, but that's for later. And what this represents, obviously this is an anecdote, but we also do have data about the phenomenon that Trump is absolutely dreading, terrified of, petrified about, which is that his legal troubles aren't going to be the perfect chance for him to have all the cameras on him to help him politically, as everyone in MAGA pretends like is the case. And instead, Americans take this seriously. They understand in large part this is not some witch hunt. And if Trump were to be convicted, that would be a nightmare for him politically. And that's what he just does not want to hear. Here's an example of that playing out in this focus group.
It's not the catch and kill that's the issue. It's the cover up that's the worst part. You know, it's the devil's in the cover up.
Well, let's put it this way. The accountant in me said the numbers don't add up. Okay? The math is not mathing. Okay?
He completely sees himself as Teflon. Like he does, nothing sticks to him. And I'm really nervous that he's starting to look like he's right.
One of these is going to have to take him down. I just can't see how you slither out of 90 plus charges.
How many of you believe that Trump should be on trial for this? Raise your hand. All of you.
There is not only smoke, there is fire.
How many times can you say it's a witch hunt? I'm personally tired of hearing it.
So if he's misappropriating campaign funds or, you know, election funds, then yeah, he needs to be prosecuted.
If we have one person who is above the law, then what is the purpose of the law?
I'm going to pause your viewing of this video super quickly to ask you to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Just click that subscribe button, and right next to it is the join button. So you can become a member to get the daily bonus show by clicking that join button. Back to the video.
Your accountant wrote it down,
Right.
recorded it. You got witnesses who said you did it.
It's not about who he's paying and what he's paying for.
That's the inequality even in this story, because the porn star, we're characterizing and castigating the women. They were doing a job.
So prosecutors say that Trump has violated his gag order, attacking prosecutors, witnesses, jurors. Does any of this surprise you?
This person has something more powerful than money. He has an audience. He has a rabid audience that is very willing to do whatever they want. So then, does even $1,000 per violation or, you know, going to jail for any period of time, is that enough given his influence?
He's going to have to go to solitary because Secret Service cannot protect him in general population.
I don't care. Put him under the jail. Put him in solitary. We do not shriek from putting other inmates in solitary confignment. Put him there and shut up. He can talk to the walls. He can talk to the rats. I don't care.
When it comes to your president, do ethics matter?
Yes.
The leadership of the free world? Yeah, ethics matter. Of course they matter.
He doesn't care about his
doesn't
family.
care at
He doesn't care about anyone except himself.
So you can tell here, the narrative, again, just to contextualize this in case you're not aware, then I'll throw it to Jessiah. The narrative for MAGA is that, yeah, it's wrong that Trump's being prosecuted, but really this is helping him politically because everyone gets that it's a big witch hunt, it's all terrible and all unfair. That's not what you're seeing represented there. I'll get to an example of polling that also reflects this, but first, give me some initial thoughts, Jessiah.
Yeah, so this is something that we've talked about in many videos, and I've had conversations like this with people on Twitter and shouting matches with friends and family about this, because this is something that, I'll give you a specific name. This is something I hear quite a bit from Piers Morgan, who's somebody I pick on quite a bit as much as I can, because, you know, from his vantage point, he sees the Trump indictments as an asset to Trump. And again, we hear this peddled a lot. And indeed, it may have been an asset. It probably was an asset, although that's debatable, in the primary, Luke. The primary. See, the problem is that so many Trump sycophants and sympathizers forget that this is a two-part election process. You have a primary in which you run against inter-party competitors, and then you run in the general election against the opposition party. It is entirely possible that these indictments and prosecutions against Trump allowed Trump to, spread the lie that he's being persecuted rather than prosecuted. And that may have helped him in the primary. Although, if I really want to die on this hill, Luke, I could actually make the argument to the contrary, given how many people didn't support Trump in the primary. Like, Biden had a much better primary by far than Donald Trump did. But I digress. Even if I grant them the premise, now we have the general election. I've seen no evidence, none, that these prosecutions are helping him with a general electorate. Because as we've discussed, Trump can't afford to win the presidency, even by appealing to the Electoral College, by just Republican voters. Republican voters do not constitute a majority in this country. He has to appeal to moderates and independents. And so as we talked about this phenomenon, ever since Trump came into office, he's radicalized the party such that they have to run as far to the right as possible. They have to be as crazy as you can possibly be. And then to try to win in the general election, we see it with Kari Lake. Take Trump out of the equation. Look at Kari Lake. Then they have to run back. They have to cover twice that distance to stand a chance in a competitive primary. And I think that's what he's running into here.
Yeah, and just to give you a sense, this is one NBC poll. I've seen more dramatic ones, but this was the quick one that I pulled up. 47%, this was back in February, 47% to 42% in a hypothetical matchup between Trump and Biden before a conviction. You throw in a conviction and it flips the election. So it goes from Trump with a comfortable lead to Biden leading 45% to 43%. Now, I will say, and you can look at the particulars, how this impacts independents, how this might impact women, independents, specifically, whatever. You can subdivide however you like, and different groups get impacted more. So in that sense, this is a disaster because I do think one of these cases will lead to a conviction. Will that happen before the election? Probably in this hush money trial. And so that could be what cost Trump the election. Also, it is sickening that it doesn't impact the election more. And that so many people go, whatever, convicted felon, let's do it. And then I'll also say that, to be clear, we're not rooting on, for political purposes, a prosecution because it could hurt Trump. We're saying that Trump brought this onto himself because of his own actions. He's an adult who has control over his own actions, and he potentially violated the law a bunch of times. So our law and order system says he needs to be held accountable for that. And I think, especially as these other trials, if not get started, are more being discussed as we prepare for them, people will be hearing about, again, the worst parts of Donald Trump. Meaning, even the hush money trial, undecided independent voters don't love hearing about the scheme that was, relevant to. But then especially conversations about how Trump tried to overthrow our electoral process to install himself as president. If you think the American public generally wants to be reminded of just how dangerous Trump is for democracy, and if you think that'll help Trump, you're delusional. And so I do think that needs to be emphasized. This is not about just rooting on a conviction because of the political implications being negative for Trump. If due process plays out and in front of a jury of Trump's peers, he's found to be guilty and that hurts him politically, then I think that's absolutely what he deserves to experience.
Yeah, it's so funny because again we get into the asymmetry. I can't help but think about this and not think about the real asymmetry in American politics because it is astonishing that the polls don't show, like, in a more rational world with a more rational electorate, a conviction for Trump would bring his support from the 40s down to like the single digits, and I'm being generous at that. And I can't help but think, man, what would happen if the shoe were on the other foot and it were President Joe Biden being prosecuted for an alleged election interference case, paying a porn star, and national publications like the National Enquirer to catch and kill stories which would hurt Biden politically. What would that do to Biden's poll numbers if the shoe was on the other foot?
He'd be done.
He'd be done. He'd 100% be done. And that's in large part due to the fact that, I'm sorry, but let's just call it like it is. President Biden's block of voters, the Democratic coalition, hold him to infinitely higher standards than the Republican bloc hold Donald Trump to. And as a matter of fact, I also say the Republican bloc hold President Biden to a much higher standard than they hold their own cult leader to. So can you imagine, how Republicans would react? How elected Republican officials or Republican voters, if you ask them, what do you think about in an alternate universe where Joe Biden was being prosecuted? What do you think about this? Oh, this is it. This is eminently disqualifying. We saw it with Republicans back in the 90s with President Clinton, right? This idea that he had an affair with a member of his staff was seen as a potential game changer. There were Republicans who thought that he was eminently disqualified. He should be removed from office just on the affair, let alone the lie. But again, the standards change for Trump, and it's just so frustrating to know that we are playing this game of politics built in where the opposition is graded on such an absurd curve. But again, to your point, what Republicans are wanting, Luke, is for Donald Trump to not even have the potential of being held accountable, even the possibility of being held accountable prior to the election. Like, again, a standard they would never grant for anybody else. Again, if this were a Democrat, they'd be like, no, voters need to make an informed decision now. We need to know if this person is guilty or not prior to the election. But what's also funny, too, is part of this Manhattan trial, which is widely seen as the least important of the many legal challenges, is actually not about hush money so much as it is election interference. The allegation is Donald Trump effectively engaged in election interference in 2016. And the very same people who are saying, no, it doesn't count, or no, that's not fair, or no, we shouldn't be talking about that, are also the very same people who think that the Hunter Biden laptop story was the game changer in 2020. So you see the double standard there. That story, which had nothing to do with Joe Biden, it was about Joe Biden's son, that should have been allowed to flourish. And any attempt by anybody to downplay it or suppress it in the algorithm, that's election interference in 2020. Donald Trump, we have evidence, paying off national publications to interdict potentially incriminating stories against him. That's just how I've heard Fox News, well, that's just what celebrities do. The double standard is phenomenal. It's just mind-boggling. I'm sorry I had to go off on that because it's infuriating.
It is mind-boggling. And I have thought of that before. If Biden all of a sudden were indicted, it would be over. He would just drop out. That would be it. It's crazy not because it would be more legitimate, this, that, other thing. It would be solely because, as you said, left-leaning independents and Democrats hold their own to a higher standard than anyone else is held. And it's so enraging. And I'm about to show you another clip that's gonna send me into a tailspin. So just prepare yourself. But this series is called The 53%, the portion of the electorate made up of women voters. And in a different moment from a little while ago from this same series, another one of these focus groups, the discussion of Biden versus Trump was also being discussed, and here was a little bit of that conversation.
They're both way too old to be there.
One's too childish, one's too senile.
What do you all need to hear to pick a candidate?
Michelle Obama come in.
I need a new candidate.
Slide in.
Yes.
I really do.
Maybe Kennedy being a stronger opponent.
Yes, I agree with that. I agree with actually both of you.
I just, okay, I don't know what to do, Jessiah. It is truly, first of all, let me be respectful, kind, and decent. I understand that there are very real concerns about Biden's age and about Trump being an authoritarian, fascist, wannabe dictator. Okay? So I'm happy we now have both of those on the table to be discussed. I would encourage people to focus less on the childishness of Trump and more on the could end democracy-ness of him. But if we want to have a conversation about both those things, fair, let's make sure we do so in a way that's proportional to either one's importance. And please look into RFK Jr. before you vote for him. What I'm finding is, and I've had a personal conversation that was exactly like that. I don't know, both candidates, I'm going to vote for RFK Jr. And then I asked them just a few basic questions about who RFK Jr. is. Do you know what they knew? And this is not insulting to them. People have lives. Not all of them are doing this all the time. And so I understand that maybe you haven't yet had a chance to research them. his last name's Kennedy. That's it. That's what a lot of people know. And that seems like a better option because he's a little younger, last name Kennedy, not Trump or Biden. But first of all, also look into Biden's record because I promise his governance actually reflects someone who clearly has his stuff together. And look into the threat Trump poses to democracy. And look into RFK Jr. I promise you won't like him that much. Okay, Jessiah.
So I'm also in a bit of a tailspin. I've got many thoughts here. Number one, we both discussed this on our respective channels, which is that there are top members of the Kennedy campaign who have publicly admitted that their number one goal is to be a spoiler for President Biden. So I think that's something you should keep with you at all times, that they have their preferences. They prefer Trump to Biden. And at the end of the day, even if RFK stands no chance of winning the presidency, which he does not, it is a statistical improbability such that we might as well call it an impossibility. They want to swing the election in favor of Biden. So RFK Jr. is not really a true option, certainly not a true viable third option. Number one. Number two, people who have concerns about President Biden's age, I've gotten flack from my own audience because I understand. I think it's a valid question to ask about whether or not a candidate is up to the task of 4 additional years. That's perfectly fair. But Donald Trump is 78 years old. Donald Trump and Joe Biden could have gone to high school together. And the same polls that talk about how a majority of Americans think that the president is unfit for office also say a majority of Americans think the same thing about Donald Trump. That is a fact. That's not a matter of opinion. It's a fact. And it's unfortunately a fact that's not discussed very often because so many political commentators are enlightened centrists who feel like you have to balance these things. So we know that when it comes to fascism and authoritarianism, Trump has cornered the market in this election. Biden is simply not a fascist or an authoritarian. So you can't do a both sides thing there. So you have to create something to create this horse race or this perception of media objectivity. And so that's why they focus on Biden's age, even though they also know that Trump is a gaffe machine whom a majority of Americans think is mentally unfit for office. But it's like, okay, well, we're going to ignore that part because we've already got something bad on Trump. We don't need to add this other factual bad thing about Trump or perceived bad thing. And you create this false balance. It is irrational, it is dishonest, and it's categorically unfair. That's the other thing I would say. The false equivalence thing, folks, we've just got to, we really, all of us, have to strangle that instinct. In life, things are often not equally bad. You can take politics out of the equation. Crime. A shoplifter and a mass murderer are both criminals. If your analysis is, they're both criminals, and that's it, you are being irrational. It is important to recognize meaningful distinctions when and where they exist. Disease. A cold sucks. Stage 4 cancer is objectively worse. To say, these two people are both sick, if that's the end of the analysis, you have failed. You have been irrational. The other thing I'll point out is that when it comes to evaluating competence, given that both of these candidates, Luke, have their, perceived issues that a majority of Americans think both of them are mentally unfit for office, you then have to evaluate them both on the merits. And as far as I can tell, the best way to do that is look at their record when they actually were the chief executive, because they both are in the relatively unique position of having been president, and look at what people who know them say about them. Okay, so RFK Jr., for example, his whole family is voting for President Biden, so that's also something to think about. President Biden's legislative and executive record is just objectively more robust than Trump's, even if you think that the policies were terrible and you wish they hadn't been passed. He got more stuff done than Trump. That means he's better at leveraging power. He's better at being an executor, a legislator, than Donald Trump. That's a point for Biden. I'm sorry. That's a manifestation of competence, even if you disagree with policy. Then look at what people say about them. When Kevin McCarthy was the Speaker of the House negotiating the debt ceiling crisis with President Biden, he reportedly told his aides that Biden was a sharp negotiator. And that's part of the reason why McCarthy was kicked out of his role. Matt Gaetz famously said on the floor of the House of Representatives, it's going to be hard for Republicans to call Joe Biden a doddering old idiot or whatever if he's constantly taking Kevin McCarthy's lunch money. That's part of the reason why McCarthy was kicked out of his job, because he lost to Biden again and again and again and again. And then you look at Trump's own cabinet, what they have to say about Trump. 40 out of 44 won't endorse him. That's unprecedented. President Biden made fun of this at the recent White House Correspondents' Dinner, where he says, I have the endorsement of my own vice president. Donald Trump can't even get that. So I'm sorry, folks. Using the best possible metrics of how we evaluate these two candidates based on their competence, it is simply objectively true that Joe Biden is more competent than Trump. And I'm sorry I had to go on my soapbox there, but that whole thing just triggered me.
And I know I can see how long we've been going. And you know what? For the sake of my own sanity, I need to keep going, okay? And it may not be the best algorithmic thing, but I just need to say, one of the things she said was, and we're not trying to ridicule, just giving our thoughts. We're sharing our views based on what was said there. What they're looking for, one of the women said, is a new candidate. Oh no, this looks like a summarization of a fresh face who they believe will bring real change. And to your point about Biden being more effective, I want people to tap into, do you want the change to happen? Or do you care more about the aesthetics? It's not that we shouldn't care about the aesthetics. I like having a president who can deliver some wildly compelling speech. That's awesome. But I think we should care first and foremost about the things that impact people the most. And I promise you, that's not speeches. It is policies that impact millions of people's lives. The clean and reliable drinking water investments that are being made, the infrastructure investments, the millions of jobs through these policies. And if you care about the well-being of Americans, then that would be what you put top of the list, right? And so then if you dive into that long list of achievements that you're talking about, you start to understand, oh wait, if we want real change, we shouldn't be doing this. It's sort of a lesser two evils. Because I can make that argument too. If you do have two bad candidates, go with the less bad one. But in this case, I think when we lose ourselves in that argument, we almost cede the ground that, yeah, it's sort of a lesser of two evils thing. When in reality, we could, both because of the record that we've seen, so obviously Biden's willing to do it, and with further pressure on him to do more, we could enact real change in a second Biden term as a sort of Democratic coalition. And that should be a part of the message too. You have the horrific things we have to avoid with Donald Trump, but we have a real chance to do real things like enshrining abortion rights into federal law and getting back people's reproductive freedoms. And I list that in particular because on this lower third chyron, it's pointing out that this focus group reveals that undecided female voters in Arizona say reproductive rights one of their top issues in 2024 election. And I say this with love, compassion, and sympathy in my heart. That's not your number one issue if you're not voting for Biden. It's just not. And I guess I'll force myself to leave it there. Jessiah, where can people find you?
They can find me at youtube.com/@ponderingpolitics. It's great to collaborate and rant with you, Luke. I appreciate the invitation.